Hi, y'all. This is Kristen Chenoweth.
Hi, I'm Gloria Stefan.
This is Sarah Bareilles.
Hi, I'm Patty Lapone.
This is Lin-Manuel Miranda. You're listening to the Broadway Podcast Network.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Theater Podcast. I'm Alan Seals, and this is a very special episode, which will be the first of 3 episodes released from my live sessions at BroadwayCon 2022. Joining me for a special little mini Mrs. Doubtfire reunion, this episode is a panel discussion with Rob McClure, Brad Oscar, and Analise Scarpaci. We had some really touching moments and, of course, lots of laughs. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts or Spotify, tap those 5 stars right now. Leave me a great rating like I'm your favorite Uber driver. And now, everyone, please enjoy this episode with Rob, Brad, and Analise.
Here you go. 1, 2, 3.
Oh my word. Yeah. This is such an awkward bunch of chairs here. All right, so... Not people, just chairs.
No, it's fine.
So our panelists, I'll introduce Analise first. She made her Broadway debut at the age of 13 with A Christmas Story before jumping into Matilda, the musical, and now she had the pleasure of playing the oldest daughter, Lydia Hillard. Analise Scarpaci. And next, 2-time Tony Award nominee with previous credits that include The Producers, Something Rotten, Damn Yankees, Addams Family, and Spamalot, playing Frank Hillard, the brother we all wish we had, Brad Oscar.
Yeah!
And that's it. There's nobody else here. Last but not least, our final guest is a 2-time Tony Award nominee himself, who is joining us literally out of his put-in for Little Shop of Horrors. He just ran here, wiped off the sweat, came out here, and a few of his previous credits, in case you didn't know, Avenue Q, Chaplin, Something Rotten, Beetlejuice, and of course, now he was the recent caring and loving Daniel Hillard, a.k.a. Geneva Euphigenia, Doubtfire, Rob McClure. So this show, I love the show. I love Mrs. Doubtfire, and the 3 of you together have been 3 of my favorite characters in general, and 3 favorite actors. So I want to start out, though, just very kind of at the beginning of how each of you got attached to the show, because I feel like when first approaching something that is a story that is as iconic as this is, and then originated from someone as iconic as Robin Williams, and then everybody else that is filling these iconic roles, there's got to be a lot of pressure. There's got to be a lot of work that goes into developing these characters. So, like, Brad, we'll start with you. When did you first get attached to the production?
Well, as Rob will probably tell you, right, 7 years ago, how long, my goodness. It was right after Rotten opened, so it was 2015, and Kevin McCullum, our lead producer, had optioned the property then, or prior to that. So I was invited into the room right after Rotten opened in the spring of 15 with Rob, and we did a reading of a version of Mrs. Doubtfire, the musical, written by 3 other collaborators. Needless to say, that didn't go so well. So then flash forward to, for me anyway, literally getting an audition for the soon-to-be out-of-town tryout and Broadway run. They had done a previous workshop reading, whatever you want to call it, that I was not involved with. I was a little sort of jealous, of course, because it was the Something Rotten creators. I knew, of course, Rob was involved, and anyway, and then wouldn't you know, things happen in show business, but I went in and auditioned for Jerry Zaks, and and got it in that way. Yeah.
Analise, what about you?
Okay, so this is kind of a crazy story, but
we got time.
I was new. I'm the newest, I guess, as of like Seattle. So they had done the reading in 2019, and I could not get seen in that room. For whatever reason, the business. And, I was very upset about it because I love the movie. It's one of my favorites. And then I went in for another project that had the same casting director, Telsey & Co. Well, Telsey Office now. And they called me in for Lydia Hillard, and I was like, great, that's really cool, because I've been dying to, at least be seen by that show, because I love that role. And I went in once, and the next day they called and said I got the role. And that was it. Yeah, it was very strange. That has never happened before to me ever.
It's called nailing it.
Exactly. That's how it should happen.
No, I was very confused. I'll never forget my audition. I went in for the role, and Jerry said, "I love you," and I was like, okay.
I love you too, Jerry Zach.
That's the only proper
I was very
response.
confused.
Sure, because when you want to roll, nothing crosses the line.
Right. I was like,
I'm
okay.
kidding. Can we joke
and
about it?
he was
Jesus.
like, okay, can you go sit 5 minutes in the hallway? And I was like, yeah, okay. And I left, and all of a sudden I heard them hysterical laughing. And I didn't know what I did wrong, or
That's what they were saying.
Right.
She's terrible.
She's terrible. It was either she's terrible, she is definitely from Staten Island,
Well,
or...
That's true.
Yeah, and I was like, I don't know. The most important thing is did my accent slip far enough that it's like, oh my God, this is terrible. She cannot be from San Francisco. But apparently, what happened was that they all turned to each other and said, "There she is."
Yay.
So yeah, that's how I got
That
it all.
story.
Wow. Yeah, unanimous.
Kevin McCullum and I had worked together on Avenue Q for years, and then Something Rotten for years, and I caught wind of the fact that he had optioned the property for a musical, and I told him at the time when I heard, I basically just sort of threw out into the universe, hey, if you ever need to hear pages out loud,
I'll be a reader.
I was like, I'll if you want to just put the pages on a table and hear it out loud, I would love to. So they took me up on that for that very first reading that, like you said, was like 7 years ago, and it didn't work, and it went away, and I thought, damn, what a great role to get to take a swing at, and it went away, and then I was doing Beetlejuice, and they said the Something Rotten team has written a draft, and we want to do a reading at the West Side Theater. Can you do it? I said, sure. So I'm doing double duty. I'm doing Beetlejuice and doing this reading of Doubtfire during the day. And we did 2 presentations at the West Side Theater, which strangely enough is now where I'm doing Little Shop, Small World. But I went, and in the West Side Theater, we did those 2 presentations, and 20 minutes after that reading, Kevin called me and said, hey, you need to get out of Beetlejuice because we have an out-of-town venue, we have the money, and we have a Broadway theater. And I was like, okay. And I went to the producers of Beetlejuice were so gracious, and Alex Timbers was so gracious and was like, it's Mrs. Doubtfire, you have to go. But strangely enough, what Kevin McCullum did end up telling me is that I'm lucky that the first draft didn't work, because that long ago, he didn't believe I was old enough to have a 15-year-old daughter. Right. But by the time the Something Rotten collaborators had a draft, he bought it. So he said, had that been ready then, you wouldn't have been the guy. So it's amazing how things take the time they're meant to take, exactly. in this case for me. But it was a role that I was always sort of passionate about. And yes, of course it's intimidating, as you were saying. But those are the type of things that you can either be scared from and run away, or scared of and go, gosh, how do I make that work? How do I do that? How would you make that work when you're looking at somebody as iconic as Robin Williams? And the thing I sort of just set out to do from the beginning was not imitate him, but to try and imitate for the audience the way he made me feel. If I can make the audience feel the way I remember his performance making me feel, that's the thing of his that I wanted to tap into most.
That's a really sweet way of thinking about it, because you're not trying to be somebody else. You're never going to be somebody else, and then you're not being your authentic self.
Of course.
And not gonna
I think the greatest
anyway.
adaptations of either material or performances are those. I mean, I was so in love with the stage adaptation of Once, because it was nothing like the movie, but made me feel the exact same way the film did in 2 completely different mediums. And that's when I think it works best.
So, Brad, looking at the role that Harvey Fierstein originated as well. Rob, what you were saying, like in this new medium of theater, that or on the Broadway show, that the role that you have, Brad, was so much bigger and so much more built out and expanded.
Yeah.
And did you know that this was kind of coming when you stepped into the role, or was there ever sort of any pressure or anything to be like, do what Harvey did, or is it always
No.
we're bringing my Brad?
No. Look, let's face it. For the most part, I mean, we are hired for who we are. I mean, Harvey is such a unique presence, and believe me, when someone did ask me when they heard I was doing this and playing the role, and they said, "Are you going to do the voice?" And for a second, I had no idea what they were talking about because to me, it's Harvey. I mean, Harvey always has the voice because that's Harvey's voice. So anyway, and then I was like, "Oh, geez, of course that and I guess I can understand again because he's such a presence. My God, right?" So anyway, but no, as an actor, that is to be honest with you, the bigger challenge. That's not my job. Isn't to be hard. My job is to play Frank Hillard as the only Rob's job and why Rob succeeded so brilliantly above and beyond his skill and his talent and who he is as a person is that in the first 20 minutes of the show, Rob McClure became Daniel Hillard, a Daniel Hillard that we were just meeting that night, not Daniel Hillard from the movie in 1994. Daniel Hillard, who wanted to be with his kids and was trying to do everything he could. So by the time he walks through that door as this iconic character, that we know with an accent that is very identifiable and helps you hone in on that too. It was like when I went into Addams Family playing Uncle Fester. You're filling a shell of something that sort of, and it's your job to, So anyway, but Rob had built up so much goodwill, I think, and such laid that groundwork as this Daniel Hillard that when that door opened, we knew it was Rob behind the playing. I think that's because that's our job ultimately. And when the material supports you and gets you there, then people shouldn't be thinking about the movie. Ideally, they should be seeing the story they're being told and. So I try not to. It's harder. My challenges in that way have been like when when I understudied Nathan and the producers. That's a different kind of like filling shoes and an iconic and an idea of what people want as to what that is, and trying to meet that halfway. Is a very tricky sort of thing. But yeah, ultimately our responsibility as actors is to go out, tell the story, play the role, and try to get all those other demons, because they are demons, and those are the things that will bring you down. Yeah. Is what is this one thinking? What do they think? Do they think I'm good? Do they miss Harvey?
That's everybody's own worst enemy in general. Like you have the devil on your shoulder that's telling you you're not good enough, and imposter syndrome in general, and then the other side that's like, wait a second, or if you're embracing this, wait a second, I'm here, I deserve to be here along with everybody else. Yep. And so I think it speaks to everybody here, right? When you're creating an original version of something everybody already knows, you've got to just be like, well, screw it. We're going to be ourselves, and like we were just saying, the best authentic version of who we are, so that everybody else immediately, Brad, exactly what you just said, that as soon as we see Daniel Hillard come on stage, or Rob come on stage, we're like, that's the Daniel Hillard, and that's who's sticking with us the rest of the time. Yeah. It's brilliant.
I always say that anytime I'm doing anything that's an adaptation, you have to go back to the ink. You have to go past the previous adaptation, back to the ink. What is the ink, and how do I put that through the lens that is me? Now, it happens that this movie was hugely influential for me, and Robin Williams as an artist and a comedian shaped who and what I am as someone who admired him. So when I'm putting this material through my lens, part of him is part of who I am because of the influences he had on me. So I would be lying if I didn't say that some of that probably channeled through me, but not in an effort of imitation, but because it was so profoundly influential on the type of comedian that I am.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I learned to play Max Bialystock because I saw Nathan doing it 8 times a week, and I saw how it should be done. And so I knew that was the outline I needed to fill, and my responsibility was to bring myself to the party and not worry about people saying, oh, he was imitating Nathan, or oh, he was imitating Robin Williams. We can't,
Yeah.
So yeah.
Annalise, you're supposed to play 15. Your character's 15.
Yes.
And
I clearly am not.
You're not.
That's not true.
It's not clear.
It's not
that clear.
You play well along with Avery Sell and Jake Ryan Flynn, who actually are kids, but you're in your early 20s. I don't want you to give away the exact number. But You did post you just graduated from college, so we'll leave it there.
Yeah.
Yay, congratulations.
Thank you.
COVID graduation. So you are kind of straddling both worlds because you're being the kid. You get to be the kid, but you are legally and for all intents and purposes an adult and now becoming we have an interview on my podcast that hasn't come out yet. Shameless plug. Subscribe. You'll get a one-on-one with Analise. And Brad. I interviewed Brad. You're next, buddy.
You got it.
And so, what was I saying? I lost my train of thought. So you get to sort of split the difference because you get to be adults with Brad and Rob and Jen Gabbatise and everybody else, but still I guess trickle down. I guess I have two questions. One is working with these two comedic geniuses. Mm-hmm. What did that do for you? And then how did you sort of pay it forward for the other two actual children?
Well, first of all, I was very, very nervous because one, I was the newbie. Second of all, I had done 2 shows, but I was in the ensemble. Like I was just dancing and singing. So, and the weakest...
You are hilarious.
No, but I was just
in
dancing.
2 Broadway shows.
No, but I've always... No, but I don't know. I never considered myself an actor. I was always a singer-dancer. So, to get this role where I can actually, act, and I hadn't been in a show since I was a senior in high school because I wasn't allowed to, and I also wasn't cast in any of my college shows. So it was like this thing where I was very frightened to perform on stage. And it was Seattle was the first time I had done it since I was 17 years old, and working with these two was just beyond anything that I could have ever imagined because I learned so much every single night even for the days that we weren't even together during the pandemic. I just learned so much just from observing and from watching, and now I do consider myself an actor as I'm approaching into my 20s. And it's been, copying what Brad said about taking a role that was so treasured. What was so beautiful that the writers did was they made Lydia sing. And he says it all the time, that the moment at the end of the show where we have our duet, Just Pretend, it was not in the movie. It was a deleted scene. And that, I feel, is a moment where, they allow Lydia to be that moral compass that you don't see in the movie, but you know that she's there, but you don't see her. And for the musical, you see her, and you see her very well.
Yes.
And you see her basically guiding her entire family. And for me personally, I'm an only child. I don't have siblings, but my family is immense. And I have a lot of cousins, and, if you happen to be at Mrs. Doubtfire one night, you were probably there with half of the members of my family.
It's amazing we couldn't run. I don't understand why we couldn't. Just on your family alone, we should still
the
be running.
Scarpacis alone kept the show alive. But anyway, I have experience taking care of people, and Lydia takes care of everybody.
Until you said that, I didn't realize it, but you're absolutely right, because the two parents are completely all over the place and literally putting on 2 different faces to get through things, and then the kids are like, we don't know what's going on. We're not. And so
and
Lydia,
and especially being with Jake and Avery and watching them grow up. Me, obviously I grew up as well, but physically Jake just completely is just a man. He's a man. And it was so nice to watch how Christopher kind of morphed pre-COVID to post-COVID, and then eventually when he came back for the last week and closed out the show unexpectedly. And same with Avery. Even though she was playing young, it was so nice to watch them grow. And for me, having that experience as a child actor, I kind of like to put my wisdom onto those two. And the 4 new ones who joined us for a month, but yeah.
it was a wild ride.
It was. It was. We've had quite the journey. We've had a journey.
Yes. You definitely have a journey. And you mentioned Jake Ryan Flynn coming in at the end. Actually, Eli Tokash over there from Take a Bow, also on Broadway Podcast Network. He interviewed Jake, and I was watching that clip that you posted, Eli, of Jake telling the story of when he was in the car, getting the call to come fill in, learning the new script in the car before going on that night, because it had changed during the hiatus,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Meant a
he
lot.
hadn't done it in 3 months, and he got a call at 9:00 in the morning to do the matinee that day of a new version of the show.
And he lives in Massachusetts.
Yeah, drove down.
I did not know
crazy.
that.
Yes.
Yeah,
Wow.
Astonishing. It was an astonishing thing
It's
that he
amazing.
did.
it was crazy.
That's amazing. Okay. So
That's showbiz. Really.
That's
No,
showbiz,
It really was
kids.
crazy. It was great.
It was perfect.
then he came and he got to close the show with
was
you,
great,
which
yeah.
is wonderful.
COVID showbiz, anyway.
Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Is, how much of the Doubtfire cast compared to the other cast that all three of you have been in are you taking with you on a personal level? Because I've always equated for the last several years now with experiencing COVID and everything we've gone through as a form of trauma, and for everybody whose livelihood depends on this business that we didn't know would ever, like when it would exist again or how it would exist again, and we still don't know how it's going to exist tomorrow. And so for all of you, you were saying like you had Zoom calls when the show shut down, and like how did you all stay together?
We went through everything a family could ever go through in those 3 years. We literally lost cast members. We lost Doreen Montalvo-Mann during the pandemic. She passed away. We had members of our cast adopt children. Babies were born. Like we literally went through.
Yeah, I mean.
In addition to a global pandemic and a show that reopened and closed and opened and closed and opened and closed, and there's something that the trial by fire, I feel like these relationships are forged in fire in that way, that these friendships are different than all the other ones because we've been through so much. And I think because the pandemic kept on forcing distance between us, we fought that harder to stay close.
Exactly.
We were sort of chasing each other in a way that bonded us in a way that I've never experienced on other shows, for sure.
Wow. Brad, is this the same, sort of echo the same thing?
Well, I'm still numb in a way. We just closed less than 2 months ago. And numb just because, as Rob said, the experience was just unlike any other. We opened and closed, we all dealt with the craziest time.
I keep on saying by the end of it, I wouldn't have been surprised by locusts.
Exactly. All the plagues, exactly. So yeah, it's... yes, big picture, of course. This is a family unlike any other as far as moving forward. I know that we are all, bonded in that way, and I'm sure that we will, be gathering in many forms. There was one last week, so things, are already happening in that respect. But, but it was a very, surreal experience in that way because you just, you just want to get your footing and you just, you know what you're doing, you know what's actually happening 8 times a week and how the audiences are responding or whatever. But it was, it was a tricky. Yeah, it was wild. I mean,
every time we would get our footing, the next variant would hit.
Yeah.
And it was like every time we were going like, oh, the last one's cresting maybe families and consumer confidence in bringing their kids who are vaccinated and or not vaccinated yet, and what are the vaccination rules today? Let's look through the papers in terms of age and when you need to be vaccinated. So bringing families to the theater was a challenge in its own way during the pandemic, and every time we just started to get our stride, and the pandemic was.
And you're doing 2 things at once, and it's still happening now 8 times a week in Broadway theaters. You're doing 2 things at once. You're doing everything you used to do 8 times a week to do a show, which, as we know, is a lot of work for everyone involved in the building. Yep. And now you are still juggling this very contagious variant that for most of the world they're fine with it because they'll stay home for a couple days or they'll. Not whatever it is, we are still actively testing. Our union says you still have to be out for 10 days if you test positive, and that's we have things we need to deal with moving forward. But all I'm saying is that it's like it's a stress. It's a you're testing several times a week at least, if not every day. I know certain companies are testing every day, just trying to keep everybody on stage and the bodies on stage. So we also never performed in a window where we weren't doing all this to jump through hoops and trying to do the show with the same cast every night, which I remember that one night the stage manager got on the mic and said, tonight, for the first time, we have the entire original cast, if you will, performing because nobody was out, nobody was sick, nobody,
it had been a long time.
And it's still happening all over, again, this is something we have
all
to
are
sort of
used
deal
to living
with.
like saints already, just to be able to sing and do the show that we need to do. But now I can't remember. I literally can't remember the last time I ate inside a restaurant with a mask off. I can't remember just because if you test positive,
you're out.
gone.
And so, and if you have a gig, or especially if you have like you're going to do a gig for 2 weeks this summer, summer stock, or you're doing a reading, it doesn't matter what it is. The fact is, so it's like we're still living in a world of being very, very aware of this, whereas a lot of the world has sort of moved on. And I'm not, no judgments there, because everybody has to make their own, and God willing, you're vaccinated and you won't get terribly sick and whatever. Yeah. But for us, again, business-wise, as far as what we do, it's it's still very tricky and exhausting. So
Well, the show deals with actually, Rob, you've come from 2 shows back to back. Like Beetlejuice 2 dealt with some very serious matter in a comedic way, and this as well deals with divorce and separation of families, and in a lighthearted way as well. And I remember, I don't remember the exact details, so I need you to tell the story, Obvi, about there was a scene where you're reading a letter, and there was an audience. There was an audience member that was going through it. Katie, right?
Yeah. At the end of the show, it's taken from the movie. Once Daniel Hillard has gotten his own TV show as Mrs. Doubtfire, he starts to read letters from viewers, kids going through things, and one of them is a letter from a little girl named Katie, whose family's going through divorce, and Daniel Hillard, on the other side of having gone through this with his family, imparts wisdom to her about, families can look like anything, and you're going to be okay. And over the course of the runs from Seattle to closing night on Broadway, I got over 200 letters from people all over the world who came to see the show. And one of them was from a girl named Katie, who was actually in her 30s, not a kid, and said, I realized that I hadn't dealt with my parents' divorce a long time ago until you were talking. And she said, just so you know, the Katie you were talking to last night was me. And those letters go on from there to talk about, 2 months ago I found out that I can't have children. And I've been trying to broach the subject of adoption with my husband, and there hasn't been the right moment. And right after your show, we discussed it on the car ride home because of the subject matter of the show, and now we're adopting a kid. Hundreds of letters of people who talk about, and so that's why I try not to bite back when the Twitterverse comes at, new adaptations of things, going, why? Why are you doing that? Why are you changing? Why are you making that into a musical? Why? Who cares? Why? What's the reason? I have 200 reasons sitting at home, and I don't think it's up to anyone to decide what can be cathartic to someone else. And if it's not cathartic to you, that's fine. But I guarantee you that things are landing for people who are going through things you may not be going through. And our show, it was deeply moving to be a part of it and to feel firsthand how it was landing on people. And comedy is so good at that. Comedy is subversive.
Exactly.
And that's why a show like this, you come to laugh, and then through laughter we crack you open so that in the end we can deliver a message. And it's just a subversive tool in landing a message. And I think our show, and Beetlejuice does that well too.
It's hard to do good comedy.
Yes.
It's very hard.
That's why you need Jerry Zaks.
Yes, you do.
It is very hard. And, Brad and Rob, like you two have made some credit after credit, made careers now out of doing comedy. Is I guess, is there catharsis in this for each of you when you're, for each different role? Like even something is kind of, I will say, Spam-A-Lot, right? You take something like Spam-A-Lot, which is just...
No, that's where I draw the line. You think I'm joking. Gosh, is it cathartic in...
Like, what is it about doing comedy that makes you feel whole at the end of the day?
Well, I mean, cathartic in a way that it's... live theater is an exchange of energy, first of all, with the audience. Any live theater, dance, music, as we know. So... the difference between doing Death of a Salesman for 3 hours and having that exchange of energy, and then doing Noises Off for 3 hours and having that exchange of energy are two very different things as an actor, as a performer, as an audience member, right? So there's no question that loving musical comedy and having had opportunities to be on stage and perform material that you do not have to work to make work. The material supports you and it works, and you have to go from there. We've all done plenty of stuff where you have to work to make it come to life and make it sound right, and you feel that, and most times the audience feels it too. So so to have the joy of great material to sink your teeth into, then there's nothing better than the sound of an audience laughing and roaring and participating in that wave of just that continues, Something Rotten was, and I think because Something Rotten was so unexpected, people didn't know what it was going to be. They had no expectations. Who would name a show Something Rotten to begin with? So the delight in audiences sort of discovering that, and then again being like really smart and tight and sharp, and God, that show was whipped into shape by those creators and Casey Nicholaw in New York, in previews basically. We did not go out of town. So anyway, when you get to do material like that, there's nothing greater, because it's such a joy. I mean, you really, it fills your soul. It's sharing this extraordinary emotion and high with 1,500 people, God willing.
Rob, do you have anything, I guess, specifically about sort of the Robin Williams? You said he influenced so much of who you are, or who you were at the time, right? And you hear this a lot, where some of the happiest people on the outside are some of the not happiest people on the inside. Case in point, Robin Williams.
Yeah. I think that goes. I don't think that is a general rule in terms of comedians. I don't know. Everyone's going through their own stuff, but the thing that Robin Williams had it so inspired me was the unfiltered impulses, right? There was nothing. He was a live wire, right? If he had an instinct, he was going to do it. Just yesterday, I was watching bloopers of him on Sesame Street with Elmo, and he had to do 600 takes because he could not keep himself clean for Sesame Street. He kept on doing jokes and going, well, we're going to have to do that again, but he didn't. He did not have the filter with which to go, don't say that. He could only do it after the fact, right? So in honoring him, I felt a responsibility to take out my filter, but not to do what he did, but just to let my live wire take the cap off my live wire and let it spark, because that's the thing that he did so beautifully, is that he just let the neurons and the let all of that fire on all cylinders in a way that was pure. And I feel like that's some of the best comedy. And he also, Robin Williams, if you look at his career, it was all subversive comedies, right? I think about things like Patch Adams. My God, you watch it to laugh, and by the end you are a puddle. Mrs. Doubtfire, you watch it to laugh, and by the end you're a puddle. I mean, he was a master at that. Aladdin, for God's sake. By the end, him going like, I'm free. I'm free. You did not know at the beginning of that movie that when Aladdin lets him free, you're gonna well up. And that was a credit to him. And I think the way in is how seriously he took those comedies, right? I worked with a great director, this guy named Aaron Posner, who uses a term that I love and I cherish, particularly in comedy. And he calls it actually, right? Abbott and Costello were masters at actually, right? Who's on First is a masterpiece, just because Lou Costello actually wants to understand. And the more he's actually frustrated at not understanding, the harder we laugh, right? So Daniel Hillard, what would it take to actually put on a fake face in front of my family? And the more you believe that I've gotten to a place of actually, the harder you laugh at the absurdity, right? If I am responding, they say the acting, right? Reacting truthfully to imaginary circumstances. But when the circumstances are so ridiculous, the responsibility to behave truthfully under those ridiculous circumstances becomes even more important. Because if we don't buy the people inside the insane pinball machine, then the pinball machine doesn't seem so crazy or so believable, or you can't enjoy it as much as what if somebody was actually thrown into the Honeymoon in Vegas. Yeah. What would I do if I was in a plane and a bunch of Elvis impersonators told me the only way out of this plane is to jump? What would I actually do? And that's where the comedy comes from. The actually. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I never thought about it like that. I like the quote too, reacting truthfully to imaginary circumstances.
Yeah.
Let me get that tattooed on my arm or something.
And trust me, nobody was more alive in that room than Rob McClure. I would venture to say 20% of the text is yours. Let's say it. Let's say it. Let's say it. No. The genius of Rob McClure. Well, all I have to say, when I sit there and I'm like, I'm not funny. I'm not funny.
No.
I'm not talented, and I'm not funny. Because you watch Rob McClure in action in rehearsal. I'm not kidding. Whatever. Let me blow smoke for a second. With Jerry Zaks at the helm, again, a director who's a master of comedy and comedic impulse. So Jerry was so delighted. Hi, Emma. Jerry was so delighted by Rob constantly being so alive in the moment and coming up with, it was Rob. I talk about it because you talk about Robin Williams being that way, and yes, we all saw Robin in action. We know how crazy and frenetic he was, and to a point where sometimes you'd be like, geez Louise, just let me take a breath, okay? But the idea that you can free associate, the idea that you have life experience that you can pull from all of this other stuff, whatever it is, and be that present and available is extraordinary, and it's why I love being in a room. It's why I want to be challenged. I want to work with someone like that because it challenges the hell out of the rest of the actors in a great way. Because you know that ball is going to be caught and thrown back. You know that you are playing tennis with one of the best, and it's and it's a joy to watch, and it's inspiring in that way, and it's how great material is created. Because nothing is more of a collaboration than a musical. I'm sorry, nothing is more of a collaboration. There were so many people involved. And people don't realize, especially because we do so many workshops and readings and shit, how much actors actually contribute. Because our names aren't in the we're not listed as writers or creators or inspirers. We're not. We're just we're in the show for as long as we're in the show, and then we leave. And so yes, it's really important for people to know in certain cases that my God, the creative brilliance that was. And if you saw the show, believe me, it was very apparent. I'm sure.
Yes.
So yeah.
Very sweet. That's very sweet. Thanks.
Here's to you. You were, Rob. Just telling the truth, baby.
What's the literal process of this? You're like, all right, here's 3 lines that are on a page, and then you're like, I'm going to start with the first word of the first sentence, and then what happens next, I don't know until it's already out of my mouth.
You can tell when something is meant to be a bit, and you can tell if the bit is playing or not. And if the bit's not playing, you have to change the bit until it plays. And if that means saying something a little bit differently, and see, rehearsal for me is playtime. So rehearsal is not about repetition, right? It's not about doing something over and over again to get it right. Rehearsal is the chance where every time we hit a scene, I'm going to do it completely differently so that I can find somewhere along those 22 times we get to do that scene before an audience sees it, I found gold. Because if it's about repetition for repetition's sake and getting it in your body, there's so much untapped goodness. And Alex Brightman is that way, where rehearsal is a sandbox, and he's going to do something. So to answer your question, like they eventually asked me to enter the play in Mrs. Doubtfire dressed like a pirate. The family is setting up a family photo. And the thing that goes wrong is that Daniel wants the family to dress like pirates for the family photo, and his wife does not. She wants it to be a Sears family portrait, and Daniel does not. Well, in that first scene, there's a couple of written jokes, and the whole point is that he has fun with the kids, but he sabotages the family dynamic because he's a child. He's a man-child and not a good partner. So looking at all of those ingredients, I went home and I came up with as many bad R jokes as I could. And every time we came in, I would throw a different one at the kids. I remember the first time, the first rehearsal I did it, I went to little Avery and I literally just went, LMNOP, and pointed at her. And little Avery, who has never improvised in her life, went, what? And I was like, well, we'll get there. So by the end, they knew that whatever I threw to them, the response was going to be R. So I would never need them to go crazy off a ledge with me. No, whatever I came at them with, the answer was going to be R. And one time I went, near, far, wherever ye. R. And then I said, directed by Mr. James Cameron, who also made the film about the big blue people, Avatar. So there was 5 million of those variations. But that's those, to answer your question, you spot moments like that. And any given comedy probably has about 50 of those moments, 25 of which are already landing on the page, but 25 that need ironing. So sometimes the writers are ironing out there, and sometimes they invite you to iron with them, but that's when that collaborative spirit takes over.
I don't know how you can do something like this without the collaboration.
That's it.
Because
No, I mean, you can. No, I mean, ideally you can. And of course, the final collaborator is the audience. So ultimately, the audience is going to tell you what's working or not working
And
to an
previews.
extent. Sure, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Rob, the looping scene.
Oh, yeah.
I remember seeing the show. Everyone seen Rob?
God,
Yeah.
Oh my God.
That is real.
is
Real.
It is real.
I remember I messaged you on Instagram. Do you remember this?
Yes.
After I saw the show, and by the way, I don't know if you know me, but I think he responds to everybody who messages him. So
Don't tell them that, please. I'm sorry, I don't. I have a 3-year-old, so only so many.
Never is. But no, I remember I was like, I had to message you and tell you how much I enjoyed that scene because I could tell it was real.
You also told me you're one of the few people who were like, I know that was real. I was watching your fingers, and I know you were doing that. I know what that equipment is. I know how it works, and you were doing that.
Yeah. So where did that? I just want to talk about the whole scene, and then we'll talk about the flamenco scene because holy crap, that was great. But the looping, where did that begin, and did it start with the idea of where it ended up, or was that another moment where you're like, I'm just going to play?
Well, so the workshop at the West Side Theater while I was doing Beetlejuice, they were trying to, when looking at the movie, you have to decide which moments sing, right? What moments are we going to musicalize? And one of the most iconic moments in the movie is when Robin Williams is left alone at that TV station with the dinosaurs. You remember? I eat wood, it tastes good. That scene. And they said, well, how can we musicalize one person alone being sort of prodigiously funny by themselves in a musical? How do we do that? How do we show a person sort of being unhinged solo? And Wayne Kirkpatrick had the idea. Wayne is a Grammy-winning songwriter who was the part of the songwriting team for our show. He had the idea, being exposed to the loop machine and other mediums, that what if there was an artist on, similar to the old school Mr. Rogers episodes, what if there was an artist who was trying to teach Mr. Rogers what a loop machine was, and outdated Mr. Rogers has no idea what the hell he's talking about, and it goes terribly wrong, but that Daniel Hillard might be left alone with a loop machine, and what chaos could that provide? Well, during the workshop, they had sort of a loose verse written of the first thing about telling time, that it would be a lesson for children about how to tell time. And what they were going to do for the reading was say, and then Daniel Hillard does something amazing with a loop machine. That's what they were going to do for the reading. And I was like, wait, does anyone have a loop machine? Can I at least play with it? And Wayne said, at my hotel room, I do. Do you want to come over? And I went over, and he taught me the basics on how it worked, and then gave it to me to take home. And I had 48 hours before our first presentation to come up with something, and I came up with the sort of like generic structure of it that I could then improvise within. But then it became crazy because I'm also puppeteering a mouse and a rat puppet that are on both hands that also need to be operating the machine. So it became this crazy multitask, but once I understood sort of the structure of what the song would be, I could play within it. And then just like anything else, you rehearse it and you find the gold along the way that you want to keep, and you find the moments that you can play within. But it was like playing a video game. Like Dance Dance Revolution or Parappa the Rappa or, that's before your time, Analise Scarpaci. Parappa the Rappa was for Sega Genesis, Google
Yes.
it. But any of these like musicalized video games where you're pushing buttons on rhythms and trying to make, it in a weird way feels like that. And once you understand the video game, you can play within the video game. But it was a privilege that they gave me the freedom to mix it up every night. And things went terribly wrong. But the audience delighted in watching me get out of it. So it always worked because the audience was in on the fact that it was really happening.
What happened in the workshop when you debuted this?
It was pretty amazing. Like I think also looping as a thing has sort of become a little bit more popular since that first, but no one in that audience had ever seen one before. Like now if you go on Instagram or TikTok, there are people who like are really amazing and have whole careers around loop machines. When we did this workshop, that was not the case. So people were like, what is this thing? And because it was a tiny room like this, they could see the machine, they could see the buttons light up, they knew that I was really doing it. And in a weird way, once we got into the theater, we had to chase that feeling again because so many people coming to see a Broadway show assumed it was tracked. So we had to find as many ways as we could to show the audience that it was in real time. And part of the writing of it became, how can we write beats for them to see that this is actually happening?
Interesting.
And because almost there are people at Broadway shows who still think we're lip syncing. So, why would you pay to see us mouth? Anyway, funny story. I went to see Something Rotten when I was going to replace Brian Darcy James. I was watching them, and I was sitting under the balcony, and right under the overhang there are those two TVs. And the woman next to me during intermission turned to her friend and said, "What are those two TVs above our head?" And the other woman said, "It's a teleprompter. In the olden days, they had to memorize it all. Can you imagine?" For anyone listening, they are not teleprompters. They are conductor monitors.
That would have been really helpful.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Can you imagine
oh
the
my
olden
God.
days?
Oh my
Oh
God. You had to do all by yourself.
Yes, exactly.
The flamenco scene was my other favorite scene, and near the end, it builds and builds as any good show should. And I want to get into the prosthesis in general because side question, was it like full-on high-end makeup, like plastered face, and then your understudies and everything? They had to get their own versions, or
Yes.
did you share? Okay.
Yes, they did.
Okay, so you didn't share faces.
No.
Okay, good. Good, you didn't share a face.
Yeah.
Hashtag.
Not, especially during COVID.
Yeah.
No face or teeth sharing during COVID.
So the process, and Brad, you were heavily involved with this.
Yes.
Because you're helping.
Oh yeah, well, helping him
On-stage
get in and out a
dresser.
couple times. Yes,
Right,
exactly.
helping get in.
On-stage dresser. Yes.
Yes, you became an on-stage dresser
Yes.
for that
Yes,
amazing
exactly.
scene.
Yeah.
And the timing, you had to. How many times did you try to rush putting on and off the Doubtfire costume, and then you have to time that to beats, and then add choreography, and just the whole thing again. Knowing, Brad, what you said, the amount of collaboration that is needed to make that happen.
Well, each
blew me
change
away.
was its own change for Rob because each change happened in a different place, in a different way. Had perhaps this one was 30 seconds and this one was 37 seconds. Oh, what a delight!
And the order in which pieces were put on and taken off was always different depending on what then the onstage business was going to be. So, for example. There were some times where the bodysuit could be built into the clothes, so you can put that on all at once. But if I then have to go out in front of the audience and take off just the clothing and leave the bodysuit on, they can't be attached because for that scene you're going to have to see the bodysuit. So in that change, what used to be put on the bodysuit and the clothes is now put on the bodysuit, then the skirt, then the thing, then the face, then the this, then your earrings. But for the next change, it's just going to be bodysuit and clothes, then face. So every one of the 31 changes had a different structure to it. The longest one was 90 seconds, which is the first time you see Mrs. Doubtfire, and then the shortest one was 18 seconds during that flamenco number. But it was full head to toe, and I owe it to what we call Team Effie, Team Euphogenios, four dressers backstage, 3 dressers and a hair and makeup person.
Do you ever not make it? Did you miss the cue?
Never, tragically. But here's the nice thing, though, is that the thing we had over the movie is that the audience knows it's real. In the movie, they yelled cut and he went into a trailer for 3.5 hours. When I have 18 seconds in the show, the audience knows I have 18 seconds in the show. So if I'm coming back on stage, just getting my glasses and earring on, they delight in the fact because they know I really just did that. So if I start a line in the wings and then get on, they know what I was just doing. You know what I mean? So I never missed in a way that stopped the play, but there were times where I came in various states of disrepair, depending on how the change had gone.
My grandmother fully thought that, because there's one where it's not you.
Yes, there's
a double.
There's one tricky one. Yeah.
And my grandmother called me up and was like, Annalise. I was like, yeah, Nan. She goes, listen, let me tell you about that change. I couldn't believe it. I said, yeah, a lot of them are great. She goes, no, he came out in like 1 second. How'd they do that? He's like, man, it's fully another person.
Make Nana sign an NDA now.
Well, she's from the time when you had to memorize all your lines.
Get out of here!
Get
out!
Get out! Can you imagine?
Can you imagine?
Can you imagine? All right, we're going to take some audience questions in a second, so think about anything you want to ask any of these two wonderful individuals. Real quick, I just want to go down the line. Are there any moments from the show that are your favorite, that are standouts, that do not have to do with your own character?
Oh, God, yeah.
No. Not have to do with my own character.
Annalise, you start.
Big fat no. My favorite number in the entire show, specifically because what happens backstage. Sorry.
Good.
But because, well, first of all, when we first saw that number, because it was new for when we came to Broadway, it was a different number in Seattle. Was it Real Man?
Yes.
So it was called it was a different thing, totally different number.
Yep.
And just watching that in development, because that was really the first new number that we had, for me specifically, watching, it was the coolest thing to watch. And also the backstage stuff I was just fully in my dressing room belting along with Charity Dawson. And I was Mrs. Doubtfire and Charity was Stewart. And we would do it every night.
Is there a video of this?
I don't think so.
Oh, man.
I know, it's very sad, but I'm guilty because I do it to the soundtrack as well, and I do both parts.
All right, so the video is not too late.
No, it's not
All
too
right,
late.
That sounds like a TikTok waiting to happen.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Listen,
yeah.
I was going to make it a trend, but then we closed, so
Brad?
you can try it.
Oh gosh, questions like this are always so tricky because there's so many parts of the show that I loved, and so many. I think what we talked about earlier, the scene at the end of the play with the two of them and the song, is really, it's just so beautiful. It's, again, when things are so well constructed and when the story is told in such a lovely way, when the music and the lyric and the dialogue are all add up, everyone's on the same page, and that was always beautiful. Always, just always touch. Yeah, really. And then like the Easy Peasy number, which also is its own crazy every night with an ensemble. Again, we had it's not, you wouldn't think of the show as an ensemble show, but there were several, big numbers in the show. And this very talented and varied ensemble of people, worked their asses off, right? And changing clothes and all that. And so Easy Peasy was a delight because again, you got to see everybody shine. It was a big old musical comedy number. Watching, So yes, that I loved as well. Yeah.
I think mine. I was never off stage, but the one that I think of is during the song "You've Been Playing with Fire." I get knocked down center stage on zero, but I get to face up stage, on my back, watching the rest of the company with Charity down front, wailing. And I always used to say, I wish I could wear recording glasses so that you all could see my point of view of that number, because it was I wanted to put a GoPro on my forehead because I was like, this is the best seat for anything I've ever seen, because Charity is just wailing 3 feet from my face. And the lighting cue in that moment in particular was gorgeous, and all of my dear friends dressed like Mrs. Doubtfire. It's just the mental snapshot I have of that I'll keep for a long time.
Oh, it's fun. All right, any questions out here? Yes.
So all three of you have been in shows before and will be in more shows to come.
Bless you.
And I imagine with sort of each show you pick up things along the way that you learn and take with you and stick with you. So what is something from Doubtfire that you think will stick with you, or something that you learned while being in the show that will influence your work in the future?
That's great.
Well, no question. As far as working with Jerry's acts, it was my first time working with Jerry as a director, and as far as Jerry directing comedy, I learned an enormous amount about the power of stillness. In comedy. The way, especially stage comedy, because the way the audience's eye and ear needs to, again, the specifics. We had a scene in the show that from the beginning, was referred to as the farce scene, which was very stressful, because if you call a scene a farce scene, you're hoping it's, going to play in a certain way. But anyway, that is, as far as performance and as far as learning something as an actor, the simplicity of something like that at this point in the process is yes, something I will certainly take with me.
Yeah, that stillness thing he's talking about, Jerry Zaks used to say, don't move. When a joke lands, don't move. And usually if you wait long enough, a second wave of laughter will come because you have to give the audience the pleasure of wondering what the two of you might be thinking.
Totally.
It just happened.
Yeah.
Right? It's this amazing thing. And when Jerry gives you a note like that, he then backs it up and says, you know where I know that? Because I was playing Muddle on the Fiddler on the Roof tour with Zero Mostel, and Zero told me.
Exactly.
That's what we're dealing with when you talk to Jerry,
Yeah.
right? So the power of stillness, the other quote that Jerry gave me that I will keep for the rest of my life and any other show I do from here on out, is you must preserve the possibility of a happy ending. Your character at all times must be desperately attempting to preserve the possibility of a happy ending for themselves, because that's the way humans are. Humans will never sit still in their own tragedy. The second that things are not going the way they need to go, the next thing is, how do I preserve the possibility of this going well for me? And you chase it as long as you possibly can. And then usually when the chips fall, it's that much more impactful because the character has done everything they can and spun every way they can to preserve the possibility of a happy ending. That's something that is really, I will keep with me for a long time, because the second your character is sort of satisfied in their discontent, the play stops for a moment. You have to continue to chase happiness, yeah?
Analise?
Jerry.
Yeah.
For me, I mean, Jerry, just
Yeah.
Jerry in capital letters. Everything that Jerry taught me was just something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Specifically, projection, which is so silly, and you always think project, but there are times where there was like a time where the entire time, every day, louder, and in my head I'd be like, oh my God, Analise, what is wrong with you? Like, why can't you speak louder? And then eventually I got the hang of it and the volume that he needed me to be at, and just volume specifically changes the way your character is, and I never had any idea, and that's what he was trying to really get at.
Clarity. He just needs clarity, yeah.
And, and going to the end of the line, which is, again, something so simple and so silly, but it's something that not a lot of people think of all the time at every second of the time when you're on stage. But also, on a technical thing, for me personally, in the show, this was the first time that I didn't have a guardian. I was doing everything by myself.
Yeah.
There was a time, I mean, it was
cool.
kind of helpful. Well, not that she did anything, but Felicia, who was the kids' guardian, I basically spent my entire show with those kids. So it was kind of like I did have a guardian in a way, which came in handy sometimes. One time I did miss a cue because I was thinking about the football game that was happening. But I was okay. I went right on stage. It was great. But yeah, learning how to navigate a show by yourself without somebody telling you to, about making your own track, was something that I never had
That's
to
so
do.
fun. That's so fun. That's great.
It's funny, too, because this is the first time you have had a guardian.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I did.
Rob has to have a guardian
Right,
now.
Rob-
Team Effie was
He
my
does.
guardian.
Yes, right, exactly.
Yeah. But to tag on to what
Exactly.
you were saying about Jerry with play to the end of the line, also he is hyper specific about punctuation,
Yeah.
which I love.
Yeah.
Like if your line is, I've never been there, so I wanted to check that restaurant out. And you say, I've never been there, so I wanted to check that restaurant out. He would say, is there a question mark at the end of I want to be there? I've never been there? No. Then it's, I've never been there, period. I've never been there is a question. Don't ask a question until you see a question mark. That's, if the writer intended the line to be said that way, there'd be a question mark at the end of it. Being true to punctuation. If there's a comma, if there's an ellipses, if there's a dash, why are they there? And not letting contemporary speech patterns muddy intended punctuation. It's a valuable thing.
Something you said about letting the audience wonder what's going to happen next. And
Yes.
like when something lands, hold still. I think the best I ever saw that exemplified was Christian Borle in
Yes.
in Peter and the Starcatcher.
Yes.
When he slams his hand
Yeah, exactly.
on the trunk. When the trunk slams on his hand, and that's like he would milk. I saw that show 4 or 5, 6 times. I don't remember how many times, and he would milk it longer and longer and longer every single time.
Yes.
So if there's a
I
bootleg
just
of
had
that,
to put in where I'm watching Christian Borle make a whole bunch of crazy things happen in Little Shop of Horrors, and it's a wild ride to be on with him because he is again, it's another live wire.
Yep. Yeah. All right, we got time for one more question over here. Yes.
So you talked about stepping into characters like Bialystok and Doubtfire, but you've also played real people like Chaplin and was it you just Fred Rogers on TV? So is that more of a challenge or less of a challenge? Playing somebody that we all know well who's a real person.
The weird thing about real people is that you have an accountability to their legacy. Like when I was doing Chaplin, Chaplin's family came to see it. You know what I mean? So you're there, you know, you've got his grandchildren going like, Grandpa didn't walk that way if you don't get it right. You know what I mean? Like there's a weird accountability to the legacy of that person. Fred Rogers, oh my gosh, maybe the most beloved person around. And luckily, in the case of Julia, I had Sarah Lancashire playing Julia Child, and if any of you have seen Julia on HBO Max, the performance that she is giving is so astonishing that any question for me as to like how far of an imitation of Fred Rogers should I do, she was the perfect barometer. Because I walked in and saw what she was doing in terms of Julia Child, and I went, oh, that much. I need to do that much of an imitation, which is not a full one, but one that feels so rooted and true. And honoring of that person. But that's the only big difference for me is that you have an extra responsibility to the people who knew and loved them, who may or may not be in the audience at any given moment. So you feel that much more pressure to get it right.
That's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. Brad and Analise, you've already answered this question. I always usually end my podcast with 3 questions, one of which I'm going to bring out now. So I don't know if you remember what you've said, but you can say it again. And it'll give you a little chance to think about it. If you could only see one show for the rest of your life, but you can see it as many times as you want, what would you say?
Right.
Brad and I
ready? 1, 2, 3. Sweeney Todd.
Great.
Easy.
Yep.
Annalise?
I think I said Billy, right?
Yeah, you said Billy Elliot.
I did. It's Billy Elliot. And
Yeah.
I heard that they're doing a new production in the West End, and I think I'm going to make a trip specifically to see it.
Awesome.
All right, everybody, help me give them a round of applause. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much.
And we should all get in the center, and we'll take a little selfie. We'll post it on my Instagram. Sure. Take an audience selfie.
Take a deep breath, make the world a little colorful.